Christian Mogensen, our next speaker, came to us from Denmark, and he will actually be here with us. He will take floor here, the stage in the Copernicus Science Center. Christian Mogensen is an employee of the Center for Digital Youth Care in Denmark. He is specialized, among other things, in radicalization and the phenomena associated with this particular phenomenon. Here we will focus on the impact of internet on young people. So, Christian, the floor is yours.
Thank you. And first of all, thank you so much for having me. I wish we could be more people here, but sadly, like global pandemics and everything. But I will try to pose quite some questions. I don't like coming with answers, so rather what I'm going to leave you with in 15, 20 minutes is hopefully a boatload of questions about democracy, well-being, and mass murder. So first of all, my name is Christian. I work in the Center for Digital Youth Care in Denmark. I'm specialized in online groupings of especially young men. I'm these years focused on gender, sexual identity crisis, and aggressive and destructive groups online. Over the past couple of years, colleagues and I have been doing work in what we call angry young men. Last year, we put out a magazine. It has just been translated, so please poke at me on Twitter or after the conference for a physical or digital copy. What we found out here, or what we worked with, was what is digital radicalization? Is there such a thing as these toxic online communities that corrupt the minds of those that use them and turn them into either angry young men or maybe sad young men? And this was a basic introduction into what we call the manosphere and the angry internet. Over the past year, we've been doing a data-driven follow-up, focusing on what actually happens in the Nordic countries. Is this just an American problem? Is this something we read about on Twitter? Or is this also something we can find in Europe and especially in the Nordic countries? What might the differences be? That will be published late November. The hypotheses that we've been working with have been to find out if it's true that young men congregate in online digital environments to discuss sadness, ostracization, and loneliness. And we took out to find whether they have an idea of what their life is supposed to be, if they're just generically, I'm sad about everything, or if they have an idea that I would not be sad if only X, Y, Z. And we have been looking at these components, aspects of the good life, what they could be, and why they don't have them. And then we've tried to find out what happens when these groups of young men start talking about violence, manipulation, revolution as the solution, as a tactic to find that good life. And what we've seen over the past couple of years have been online, we can find a disproportionately large amount of young men being sad, being vulnerable, not feeling well. And when I say disproportionately large, I mean that if we go into a school class, if you go into your workplace, if you go into your office, as soon as the global pandemic dies down and we can all not work from home anymore, and ask any man, any age, how are you feeling? He'll give you one answer. He'll say, fine, I'm feeling fine. Please don't ask about my emotions. I'm feeling very fine. Please stay emotionally distant. But when asked online, when asked in anonymous spaces, young men increasingly told us, I'm not fine. I'm very fucking far from fine. And they identified several key topics that they felt were missing from their life. Sexual attention, or sex, friends, comrades, social communities, and achievements or respect for achievement. The young men also told us that they don't like being sad. It's hard being sad when you're a man. Instead, they often chose to get angry, to get mad, to get revenge, because those are very masculine narratives and very masculine traits. We as men feel more comfortable being angry than being sad. They also knew who to be angry at, because anger needs a direction. And they often directed it at immigrants, people of color, and women. Even more so, strong women, outspoken women, loud women, quote-unquote, hysterical women. So we broadly found that these young men fell into two groups, and I use these groups very loosely today. One of them we can call the alt-right. Alt-right is an alternative right-wing political movement. It's focused on social and identity and immigration politics. It's focused on people of color, immigration, family patterns, and it's focused very much on religion. It sprung out of the US in the 2000s and the 2010s and has since been appropriated in Europe. And when we talk about it, we see an oppositional political culture. We see a political culture being opposed to a lot of things. We do not like socialists. We do not like homosexuals. We do not like religions outside of Christianity. We do not like this. We do not like that. They don't have any solutions outside of just, we don't like that. And what we see is a political movement having no formal leader. There is not an alt-right party. There is not a party headquarters that we can go into and have an open discussion. But we do see some people being touted as bannerlords or spokespeople. And we see a group of young men increasingly talking about racial realism. Like, racial realism is when you hear someone saying, I'm not racist, but. Like, I'm not saying that it's only because of the immigrants, but. Like, that whole small but. That's racial realism. And we see a large group of people talking about the conspiracy theory of the Great Replacement. The theory that the immigrants, will run over our borders, have so many kids, so many children, that we can't live in our own country. Therefore, we need to stop them from coming to us. And we see an extremely conservative identity and family political view. And what's interesting here is that even though this is a political movement, it's not formulated by the politicians. It's formulated by the internet. It's formulated and designed and defined by memes, by narratives, and by ideas spread primarily online. And this might just be a political movement, and we live in democracy, so I'd happily fight for any political movement. Problem is that we do see this political movement, quote unquote, being used as an excuse, as an explanation for mass murders, terrorist attacks, and the fight against democracy and fight against society. We see people saying, I needed to kill those people because otherwise the Great Replacement would have happened. I needed to kill the young people on Utøya, otherwise the immigrants would have come to Norway. I needed to kill the Muslims in New Zealand, otherwise so on and so forth. I needed to do this. There was a call to arms. So we see this as a set of inherited values. We see people today talking about Anders Breivik showing the way. We see people today talking about Patrick Kreutz's putting into action the plan formulated 10 years before him and so on. Like, we see this set of values. We see these attacks today, these movements being attributed to someone before them. It's inherited. That's one part of it. The other part is not political in nature. The other part is sexual in nature. The other large group, we can call them the incels, the involuntary celibate young men. It's a social grouping of young men who identify by the fact that they cannot, by any means necessary, have sex or sexual attention. They don't have any direct leaders. They do have some spokespeople, and they do have some role models, but none that are designated or chosen by the groups. And they measure human worth, or cultural value rather, in how much sexual attention you can have. And then this sexual attention will be biologically and socially determined almost from birth. You can be a fake cell, not a true incel, if you're a man who's kind of good looking, but could still probably have sex if you tried really hard. Like, if you went to the gym, if you got a new job, if you dressed better, you could have sex. You're just in a dry spell right now. That's not an actual incel. That's not who we're talking about. We're talking about the people in the lowest sexual hierarchy, the people at the bottom who, no matter how hard they try, they are so ugly, they are so much at the bottom of the social barrel that they could never have sex. And they think that this is biologically determined. Like, you're born with a face, you're born with genetics that determine how sexually attractive you will be. It's about your jawline, it's about your forehead, it's about your nose, it's definitely about your eyes, it's about the size of your wrist, it's about the shape of your earlobe, and so on. Depending on whether or not you can check these boxes, you will be sexually attractive to women. And if you are physically, biologically, genetically attractive, well, you might still be a loser. You might still have the virgin walk. You might still be at the bottom of that social barrel I'm talking about. If your parents were poor when you were born, well, you don't have money to show off the clothes that could accentuate the body. You don't have any means. You don't have a ladder to crawl out of the hole that you were born into. On the other side of the spectrum, you have the Chad. The Chad is the outspoken, the assertive, the boisterous, the very manly man. He's sexually greedy. he takes all of the sex from all of the sexually available women, so there's nothing left for the incels. On the other side, you have the women. The women will probably, most of them will be Stacy's. A Stacy is a woman who knows that sexual attention, is transactional in nature. So she, as a woman in this narrative, she can't do anything. She can't have a job. She can't make money. She can't have any political influence. For all of that, she needs a man. And the only thing she can offer a man is sexual attention. She found that out, so she's playing into that. Short skirts and big boobs and large ass, like all of this that men apparently like. On the other end of the female spectrum, you have the Becky. Becky is just the pre-Stacy. Becky just didn't find out that she only has sex to offer. She's probably in university. She's probably trying to have some sort of professional influence. But the point of the fact of the world is that, well, she's not going to have, because she's a woman, and women are worth less and capable of less than men. So women need to trade their sex, their sexuality, to men to have any sort of influence, to have any sort of power. And the Stacys found that out. This is a group of young men that mostly think that sexual attention is a human right. So if I'm not getting sex, then I'm being oppressed, and I'm obligated to fight back. And once you found out that this is how the world is, once you take the red pill, well, then you're in. Then you're part of the resistance movement to fight the strong, independent, loud-spoken women, because they try to take sex back. They try to hold on to the sex. This is a narrative, this is an idea that we need to have sex readily available to all the good men. And all the good men are not chosen by the women, but by the men themselves. There should be sex available for all men. And again, we might think of this as, well, some guys sitting in their basement being really angry at women. I hear that a lot. Well, what's the big problem? The big problem is that we also see these men or people saying that I'm an incel, killing people, doing terror attacks, doing mass murders, killing people in the name of a sexual revolution. It's this set of ideas that women are to blame for everything. And we see a doubling over effect of these two cultures, the political movement, the sexual movement, in quotes like this: feminist culture will eventually end up being squashed because the men have either become too demoralized or too weakened to protect their women, and because they've become so fed up with their incessant ridicule that they just don't care anymore. That was Anders Breivik in 2011, just before he killed 77 people, injured more than 300 people in Utøya and in Oslo. Because of evil women, the immigrants will come. So I will need to kill the socialists, the Democrats, to protect us from feminism, to protect us from the others. And when I talk about this, I talk a lot about the angry internet. I talk a lot about terrorist movements and terror attacks and so on. It's not always that dramatic, because we have two other problems that are less theatrical, but in my opinion, way more important to also talk about. We know that some of these groups attack their targets, women and people of color, immigrants, not only by mass murders, but also by digital attacks. This can be doxing, hacking, threats, fake photos, and so on. We know that outspoken women and policymakers are targeted primarily by these movements. We know that, therefore, a lot of women disengage from the political debate and from policymaking. We know that women are targeted by these groups, so they don't engage in the democratic movement. Therefore, this is also a democratic problem. We also know that when interviewed or when surveyed, these young men say that they report extremely low well-being, low social effects, and very low happiness. We know that most of these communities that are aggressive or hyper-aggressive in nature started out by basically being support groups, and we know that these support groups are places where the misfits can fit in and have freedom of speech. So this is also definitely a problem of young men having very low to non-existent well-being. This comes about because we as humans hate uncertainty. The more complex societies we live in, the more we want to have something that identifies us. We want to be one of the blue guys. If we live in a hyper-complex community, we want to definitely be one of the blue guys. And that increases. So what we do see in all of these communities and all of these digital environments is that there's these narratives, that the others, there's a group of others that are hunting you, that will hurt you, that are after you. Society is unfair. No one from the public is going to help you. there's a narrative of the elite. That can be academics, that can be rich people, that can be sexually active, attractive men, are dangerous and malicious, out to hurt you. And there's an idea of you cannot do this alone. You need someone, you need a team. And of course, we could just talk about it, but my point here is that I'm talking about young men, and young men do not talk about it. So they seek a group, they seek a clearly defined, ready to fight for them group. And this is where it gets interesting, because some politicians will actively play into that. I don't know how many of you heard the shit show that was the American presidential debate last night. But when Donald Trump said, "Proud Boys, stand back, but stand by," he's talking about the alt-right movement. The Proud Boys are the militarized department of the alt-right. They're told to stand by, like, we might need you. The president is calling on you. And this morning on Telegram, on Gap, on all the right-wing, or primarily used by the right-wing movement digital environments, everybody was up in arms about the president said that he might need us. We're supposed to stand by for this upcoming civil war. Because Donald Trump talked about the elite and the others, the red shirts. He said after the standby comment, he said, "I'm going to tell you what, someone needs to do something about this anti-fascist problem. This is a call to arms. This is we might need you. You need to take the red pill. You need to join my side of the civil war." That's an attractive feeling. It's nice to know that you're needed. This is a calling in life. So when we look at what these young men think is a danger to them, they often say that, well, we spent the last 20 years talking about the rights of women, the Me Too movement, the feminism movement. We spent the last 20 years talking about Black Lives Matter and immigration policies and how we should care for someone else. We spent the last 20, 30, 50 years talking about what's wrong with white supremacy and patriarchy. So what's left for the man? This is actively fighting the white man. So white men with no well-being, who don't feel good, say, well, if we're actively fighting me and I already have nothing, that really fucking sucks. So they look for cultures that will fight for them. This can be men going their own way, men's right activism, alt-right, incel, gentlemen, pickup artists, trolls, so on and so forth. But this manosphere movement also spills over into the public eye, because of course it does. Last year we had a survey in Denmark. 43% of the people asked thought that the fight for equality had gone too far. When surveyed, Danes, more than 4 out of 10 think that the fight for equality has gone too far. We're done listening. Like, the women have the right to vote, they have the right to work, all this shit. Like, what more do they want? The fight for equality has gone too far. That is a really dangerous notion. Because what we see is that these cultures appropriate pop culture movements. They love the Joker movie. They love Rorschach from The Watchmen. They love V from V for Vendetta. And they can always quote these things that beneath the mask there's more than flesh. Beneath this mask there's an idea. And ideas are bulletproof. Like, this is a very romantic notion of, I might not care, but I can sacrifice myself in the name of a case that's bigger than me. And we see this spilling over into influencers. When we look online, we can readily find thousands of comments decrying how feminists should be fought, how women should not be allowed to be part of the discussion. And we see some of the most popular influencers, political influencers today, having basically one trick. They want to crush feminism. This narrative of being the strong man that will fight all of the evil women that come to take away the rights from the men, well, apparently it can net you millions of dollars and even more views on YouTube. This idea of the strong man being the guy who fights women. Apparently it works. So what we take from all of this is, of course, after a scientific approach, we see that we know young people, everybody, wants to hang out with someone like them. We know that some young people have trouble in making friends. We know that some of these young people having trouble making friends go online instead. We know that there's a danger that they isolate themselves online because they only have success, they only have social clout online. So they don't go on Facebook, they don't go on Snapchat, we don't find them on Instagram because That's very positive. Instead, we find them on the very negative sites. 4chan, 8chan, incel forums, so on and so forth, where there's a very negative focus. Instead of sharing loves and likes and smiley faces and comments and retweets, they're told they're a faggot, they're told to kill themselves, they're told cope until you rope. Like, just make do until you can finally kill yourself. Why do they go there? Why don't they go on Instagram and just have some heart-shaped likes? Why do they choose the abusive digital relationship? Because happy is really hard to live up to. Happy is the smiley faces, the thumbs up, and the hearts on Instagram. That's fine if you're successful. If you have the happy stories to share about traveling, about being successful, about being hot, cool, go on Instagram, have your likes. But they all tell us that when a social media is so pointed at you, like Instagram or Snapchat is like, who are you? Take pictures of you so I can see who you are. That multiplies your feelings. So if your feelings are negative, or if your life is negative, that's just going to be multiplied if you're on Instagram. So instead, they choose sites that are anonymous and sites that actively target the happy surface level life that Instagram is. What they tell us is that all these average social media sets a very high bar for the quality of life. To be popular on Instagram or Snapchat, TikTok as well, you have to have social interactions. You have to be kind of sexual. You have to be academically progressful. You have to have political engagement. You have to be successful to be working or functioning on Instagram. Instagram, Facebook, Snapchat, TikTok is made for people who are, or at least want to try to look happy. If you don't want to try to look happy, go somewhere where they try to actively tear down the bar. And like one of them told us, the child who's not embraced by the village will burn it down to feel its warmth. Or he'll build his own village. What we see is an idea of a counterculture that is based on the fact that my life could be better if only men went back into nature, men were men, women went back into the kitchen, maybe the bedroom, and the others went back to where they came from. Like if we tuned back time like 150 years, everything would be easier for me. Back when women were women and men controlled them. Like everything was so much easier back then, politically, socially, romantically. So it's this idea of hyperconservatism or anti-progressiveness that pervades all of these environments that we've been studying. And we see a notion, basically a recipe for a real man. He's in nature, he eats meat. You can't be a real man if you're vegan. He drinks his coffee black, and he has one woman. He will fight for her. He makes money, he's successful, like this proper good man. And that kind of plays into one of the critical things about being a young person. That you have to be happy, and you have to find a way to formulate a life that allows you to be happy for the rest of it. So everybody's usually in an inevitable fluctuation between being happy and being sad. Usually we have systems, friends, lovers, coworkers, work, school, hobbies that help us be more happy than sad. Sometimes if we fail in these parameters, we become unhappy. If the systems are unresponsive, we can despair. We can say, there's nothing that can help me to become happy again. This is, like I started out by saying, this is a very hard notion for men to stomach. So instead of being in despair and being super unhappy, they become angry. They choose agency. It's not fair that I'm in despair. It's not fair that I'm sad. It's not fair that I feel vulnerable. I'm a man. I shouldn't be allowed. I shouldn't be designated. I shouldn't be punished by feeling sad. So instead of focusing on themselves, they focus on someone else. They create a counterculture. This gives them a sense of belonging, a direction for their anger, a purpose in life. This is easier to stomach. This is focusing on other people rather than myself. And when I'm unhappy, I don't want to focus on myself. I want to focus on who is making me unhappy. And that's the elite, that's the women, that's the others. And countercultures will always have an object. They will always be targeted at something. Usually here, the men we studied, it's women. And the counterculture will then give you a narrative to explain why you've been feeling sad, lonely, passed over for your whole life. It can give us suicide notes like this one. Humanity. All of my suffering in this world has been at the hands of humanity, particularly women. It has made me realize just how brutal and twisted humanity is as a species. All I ever wanted was to fit in and to live a happy life amongst humanity. I was cast out, I was rejected, forced to endure an existence of loneliness and insignificance, all because the females of the human species were incapable of seeing the value in me. So this suicide note, or goodbye letter, is that an angry man, or is that a sad and vulnerable man? At least we know he was a mass murderer. That was Elliot Rodger just before he killed 7 people and injured dozens in Isla Vista. And he's heralded as the supreme gentleman, as the leader of this sexual revolution by another mass murderer. And we see the last words by other terrorists, mass murderers, as here I am, 26, with no friends, no job, no girlfriend. Is that angry, or is that really fucking sad? So, it would be easy to say that the communities online where these young men meet, well, we should just close them down because obviously they're toxic. But when I interviewed one of the men who made the biggest incel community in the world, he said that the community is filled with people who are at their lowest. They suffer, they're alone, and while they can talk about their plight on other spaces, most people simply don't get the issue. They'll be suggested to keep trying, to man up, to be more confident. Many of these are unreasonable and unrealistic and make little of the suffering that the person is going through. Thus, many people were left emotionally homeless when the other forum was banned. This forum attempts to recreate such a home for some of them. So is our solution really to just close it down? Or should we try to qualify it? So the questions I'm going to leave you with, like the challenges I'm going to pose you, the problems that you guys need to find a solution for over the next, well, hopefully a couple of years, is that most of these digital enemies of feminism and progressiveness believe that they are the egalitarian. They don't believe themselves to be the bad guys. They think that they fight for equality. They believe societal progression is what has taken the happiness away from them. Therefore, they fear it. They just want to live in the world 200 years ago because there they would have been successful. And we, the professionals, often say that, well, it's just the internet. They just say it for the lulz. They don't mean it. They are just shitposting. Are they right? Like, we need to actively have this talk. We need to acknowledge that these young men in their world are not the bad guys. And we need to make a choice whether or not we acknowledge that only anger is a masculine emotion. We don't talk about the sad men. We don't talk about the unhappy men. We don't talk about the men not successful. We talk about the vengeful men. We talk about the men who are fighting for something. Or we talk about the successful men. That's a dangerous narrative to be a sad man in. And when we only talk about men when they have reached the emotional level of anger, we risk an emotional snowball effect. We wait until this anger has cultivated and has risen, drew emotional interest. We risk treating sadness with anger management. And after spending about 2 years on all these very dangerous, very angry forums, I need to say they're kind of beautiful in nature. It's young men bonding, young men talking about emotions, talking about being together, talking about having a brotherhood, a sense of worth, obtainable personal goals, like how could you become a better man? How could you become happy? It's agency through solidarity. It's a ton of things that we would love to promote in schools, in hobbies, in scouts. Here, it's just directed aggressively, usually at women or immigrants. But the base nature of it is very, very positive. So the last thing I'm going to say is that if we reduce these men and these movements to just being angry or just being violent, we're fixating on a symptom much rather than a cause. And we cannot offer any solutions that don't try to help these young men. Thank you.